Welcome, everyone. For our session today, we do have Spanish translation available for our Spanish-speaking families. If you would like to listen on the Spanish channel, please click on the globe at the bottom of your screen for translation services. I'm Krista Martinez with Constellation Consulting, and we're pleased to assist the New Mexico Children, Youth, and Families Department with the 2023 CYFD Resource Family Conference and virtual webinar series. This event is funded by New Mexico CYFD, and our live sessions have been taking place each Thursday, the month of April. For more information about the Resource Family Conference and our to view your sessions, please visit cyfd.org Resource Family Conference. Today's session includes a welcome by Kathy Melendez, Foster Recruitment and Retention Coach with CYFD, followed by our keynote, Janessa Garay. Following Janessa, we'll have Cynthia Aragon of CYFD and Shelly Begay of Human Services Department. Also for today's session, attendees' webcams and microphones have been disabled. If you have a question for today's presenter or panelists, please use the Q&A function within Whova. And we'll address as many questions as time allows during the panel discussion. Also, any materials provided by today's presenters will be posted as part of this session within the event app. Following today's session, we appreciate if you take a moment to complete our session feedback by clicking Rate Session in the session of the Whova app. You can also access the session feedback of the survey in Whova. For those who would like to receive a certificate of completion, if you would, you'll need to do that as part of the session evaluation. I also want to add, please double check your email address when you do the session feedback. We've had a number of bounce backs, and those will have to be sent out manually, which takes a little more time. So please just take a moment to carefully make sure that you are entering the correct email address. If you need assistance during this session, you can email me at krista@constellationnm.com. You can also utilize the Q&A feature or the Ask the Organizers feature in Whova. And you can view complete bios by visiting the speakers page for this session. So with that, I'd like to turn the time over to Kathy Melendez with CYFD. Kathy?
Thank you, Krista. Hi, everybody. My name is Kathy Melendez. Hola a todos los que hablan español. I work with the Resource Parent Training Unit, and I get to work with my supervisor, Celestina Garcia, and two other colleagues, Shanda McCoe and Jessica Mora Torres. You will be hearing from us in the future. There will be training opportunities that will be virtual and some in person. So I did want to let you know so that you can be prepared for that. I also want to thank all of our resource parents who have participated in the conference. It has been a pleasure interacting with those of you who have called me, emailed me, texted me, and those of you who've been having conversations on the Whova app. And so I want to continue that collaboration and communication with you all through a survey that we'll be sending out. I did post a survey on the Whova app, and Krista's team will be sending it out again after today's keynote speakers, okay? And so I want to ask and encourage you to take the survey because we want to know what you're feeling. We want to know your feedback, what worked, what didn't. And most importantly, is going to help us prepare for an even better conference in the year of 2024, which will be in person. So with that said, thanks again. I hope you enjoy your conference tonight. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kathy. So with that, I'd like to kick us off with our opening keynote, Janessa Garay. You can read her full bio on her profile. Welcome, Janessa. You're on mute, Janessa.
I apologize, everybody. Good evening. It is an honor for me to be here with you tonight. Resource families really are the backbone to our child welfare system here in New Mexico. Without you, some of our children, our families would be lost and wouldn't have the time necessary to heal, to restore, and to get in a better place. So I thank you. I've gone and taken the time to review all the questions that were posted prior to the conference, and I'm going to try to answer as many as I can towards the end of the session. But after I'm done speaking, I will keep reviewing and try to answer as many as I can in the chat as well. So I hope that you enjoy this hour. I hope that you find it informational. I am a lover of history, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background so you understand why I think that it's important for you to understand the historical trauma that has occurred to Native Americans in the United States when it comes to families, when it comes to children, and why we need the Indian Child Welfare Act and the Indian Family Protection Act to restore what has been broken for so many years. So I am not only an attorney that specializes in the Indian Child Welfare Act and now the Indian Family Protection Act. That was one question. What does ICWA stand for? Indian Child Welfare Act. The other, what does IFPA stand for? Indian Family Protection Act. So I specialize in both of those. In addition to being an attorney and practicing in child welfare, I am also an instructor of law studies and a history teacher of United States history and New Mexico history. So I spend a lot of my free time reading, learning, talking, and I really have come to have a special place in my heart for Native American culture. And I was first exposed when I started practicing on the Navajo Nation reservation. And I came into contact with so many people that welcomed me into their home and taught me about their culture, taught me about their tradition, taught me about their ceremonies, taught me what it meant to be, for instance, they're a Navajo parent. And me reading ICWA and understanding the law is something very different from me being exposed to and actually learning what it meant to be a Navajo parent. As I became more familiar with the Indian Child Welfare Act and started practicing more in child welfare, I was also able to be exposed to the Navajo ICWA workers who taught me through their expertise what it meant for them to be a parent and what it meant for them to be part of a family and what it meant for them to be part of a clan and what it is that they are looking for when we are enacting and preserving the Indian Child Welfare Act. So other than that, I've also practiced on the Pueblo of Laguna, where again, I was welcomed. I've been part of feast days. I've been taught so many different things that I couldn't have understood if I wouldn't have been welcomed into their culture. So I'm very grateful. Everything that I'm going to teach you today has come from so many different sources and so many different people and so many different cultures that have just welcomed me. And I hope to continue to be educated so that I can continue to share the knowledge that I've built for myself. And I hope that today you guys will be able to understand and make the connection of why these laws are absolutely necessary. And the purpose behind them is truly to be a solution to all of the problem policies and the devastation and destruction that has occurred to the Native American family that results in the destruction of their culture and the destruction of, literally, if we would not have implemented these policies in ICWA and IFPA, we could have had a cultural genocide in some of our Native American tribes and nations. And so these things are instrumental in protecting the children, which in turn protects the culture. I hope that that makes sense. That's kind of a nutshell about me, what I do, what I know, what I love, and why I want to share it with you today. So we're going to start with learning about what is trauma in general. And then we're going to go into intergenerational trauma. We're going to go into historical trauma. And then we're going to go and try to learn and understand about how trauma has impacted Native Americans, which in turn impacts child welfare, and the reason why we need these two policies and the policy changes. I hope that you've heard that ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act, is the golden standard for child welfare, and IFPA, the Indian Family Protection Act, is the platinum standard. So IFPA goes above and beyond ICWA in providing protections to the Indian child and the tribe. We have to give absolute deference to the tribes. They are sovereign nations. And if you remember nothing else from this teaching session tonight, please remember that the child's tribe is the third parent. The child's tribe needs to be involved in every step of an investigation to a child's custody case starting throughout the entire case if they are in protective custody with CYFD. So that means that resource parents, I hope that you understand that you play a big role as well in trying to maintain the child's relationship with their tribe, allow access to the child's tribe to the child. And then also in some situations, and this was a question in the chat, there's some situations where maybe the child doesn't have a distinct bond or a distinct connection yet with their tribe. And that's what we're trying to fix. There's so many different reasons why that might not exist. And the goal is to restore that relationship, to foster that connection, to give that child a chance to not only understand who they are, but to become involved in who they are, to learn who they are, what they are, and what their tribes and their nations have to offer them. And it's something that's so deep and so innate that it's really hard for me to put into words. But Native American children are born to their tribe, and it's a part of who they are, their clans, their families, their villages. They need to know that their hair is sacred, for example. They need to know that there's certain traditions that they need to know about and they need to follow for their health, for their mental well-being, for their spiritual well-being, for their clarity and being connected and exposed to the beautiful culture that they belong to can really change the outcome of their life. So I appreciate you guys coming today with an open mind and an open heart and a willingness to learn a little bit about this history and why we need these policies. Give me just a moment to share my screen. So we're going to start with the basics. This first part is, what is trauma? So trauma results from an event, series, or events or a set of circumstances that's experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally threatening and has adverse effects. Now, oftentimes this isn't coming directly in the context that I'm bringing it, right? It's not always coming directly from the people that they're being exposed to. The way that I'm going to try to talk about it to you today is in a larger picture and how trauma that's been experienced by someone else, it can be secondary and it's actually fluid and spills over from generation to generation to generation. And so we have to try to first understand that, heal everybody involved, and of course, address what the issue was that caused the trauma in the first place. So it impacts an individual's physical, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being, and those adverse effects can be lasting. So what is intergenerational trauma? And I look to Dr. Abrinono to this definition. And so what she says, I love the way that she describes it. I think it's in simple terms for us to all understand. And it occurs when a traumatic event takes place to either an individual, family, or collective community and gets passed down to subsequent generations. So traumatic events are often perpetrated by outside sources rather than within the family itself. And so here, please pay attention to the examples. Examples include generations that have been exposed to discrimination, oppression, violence, sexual abuse, accidental deaths, and suicide. So Dr. Abrinono goes on to explain that the term was first acknowledged in 1988, and this is absolutely fascinating. There was a study performed on Holocaust survivors. And the reason why the study was performed, because they found that Holocaust survivors were overrepresented in psychiatric referrals by a staggering 300%. So that meant that Holocaust survivors were being referred to psychiatric facilities or physicians at a 300% rate higher than people of other ethnicities. And so its impact shows that there can be generational trauma across various cultures and communities, including what I want to bring your attention to is Native Americans who were forced to attend residential schools, in addition to African Americans who experienced generations of slavery, segregation, and institutionalized racism. So I submit to you that Native Americans historical trauma and intergenerational trauma goes so much further beyond residential schools, boarding schools, which we'll talk about in detail in a little bit. But it starts as early as colonization in 1491. I won't go into too much detail then, but we end up with policies that saw the Native Americans as savages and the need to have them join Western mainstream society. And in doing that, that meant taking them from their homes, taking them from their land, removing their land because they had very valuable resources, creating Native American reservations, and forcibly removing them from their homes. So they've lost their land. They lost their people when disease was introduced by colonization. They lost their children when the government did enact boarding schools, and many of them didn't get their children back. So we have to understand that the level of trauma that the Native Americans have experienced in the past 300 years, even if we just look at that since 1776, when our country was founded, it's almost unreal. And it's almost hard to believe if you don't really study it and study that part of history. Not all of us learn this in our US history classes, but it's out there and it's real, and we need to understand it in order to understand why we need these policies. So what is historical drama? Not drama. According to Dr. Abriano again, and as far as the stress and trauma evaluation and psychological services, historical trauma is an example of intergenerational trauma and refers to the legacy of traumatic events that are experienced by a collective group of people. Often these communities have faced, again, oppression, and the social and psychological effects can be observed among succeeding generations. So again, if we think about Indian boarding schools, that was not very long ago. If we think about the Indian Adoption Act, Indian Adoption Project, that was not very long ago. So we have people in their 70s who actually experienced that. So many of the children that you come across, or you may come across, or are in child protective services, their grandparents went through this. And then their parents were born to grandparents who had suffered these types of oppressions and this type of trauma. And you see it again trickle down to the children. And it can affect someone's ability to to safely parent or to even know how to deal with the trauma themselves. So I know this is a little bit long, but it's very important to make the connection between the trauma and the Native Americans. And so again, there's another comparison to Native Americans and the Jewish Holocaust survivors. So this may be kind of repetitive, and I'm sorry that I'm going to read this to you, but I think that it's really important. So to explain why some Native American individuals are subjected to substantial difficulties, Braveheart and DeBron, and this was a study done, utilized the literature on Jewish Holocaust survivors and their descendants and pioneered the concept of historical trauma. The current problems facing the Native American people may be the result of a legacy of chronic trauma and unresolved grief across generations, enacted on them by the European dominant culture. The primary feature of historical trauma is that trauma is transferred to subsequent generations through biological, psychological trauma, and the trauma is transferred again to psychological, environmental, and social means, resulting in a cross-generational cycle of trauma. The theory of historical trauma has been considered clinically applicable to Native American individuals by counselors, psychologists, and psychiatrists. So this isn't something that is just coming out of the history books. What this means is that this is evidence-based practice that is accepted among the psychiatrists and the psychologists who are experts in this field. So when we talk about historical trauma, again, it's not just something that people in child welfare are talking about or just our policymakers are talking about. It is the people who are dealing with this trauma, the clinical specialists who have recognized this and understand that there is a connection between the behavior that's being displayed now and the trauma that has happened repeatedly over and over among history that the Native Americans have been subjected to. So I wanted to give you some specific examples of Native American historical trauma so that you can understand why we're here today where we are, where we need ICWA and we need IFPA. So I'm going to go over the problem policies. The first one is the Indian Removal Act of 1830. Then we have the Trail of Tears, 1838. Then we have the Navajo Long Walk, which happened here in New Mexico in 1863. We have Kill the Indian and Save the Man in 1832. We have Indian boarding schools in 1869. And then we have the Indian Adoption Project, which was implemented in 1958. So what was the Indian Removal Act? The Indian Removal Act was signed into law by President Andrew Jackson in the 1830s. So Andrew Jackson and the colonists in the United States, after the United States had been established, had a vision of what's called manifest destiny. And that means that they believed they had the God-given right to own all of the land from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast. And so what that meant is they needed to expand westward. It's called westward expansion. But in order to do that, it meant that they needed the land that belonged to the Native Americans. So what they did is President Jackson created this policy that was supposed to be peaceful. And it meant that the Native Americans would be moved from their lands east of the Mississippi to lands west of the Mississippi. There were a few tribes who did go peacefully, but many resisted the relocation policy, understandably. Again, that was their home. That's where they had lived for hundreds of years, and it was sacred to them. Their land, their home, their earth is a part of who they are and where they live in harmony. And suddenly that's being stripped away from them, and they're being forced to move hundreds of miles away. So in the fall and winter of 1838 and 1839, the Cherokees were forcibly removed because they refused to move. And when I say forcibly, I mean with arms, I mean with force, I mean physically taken from their homes and forced to walk by the United States government. Approximately 4,000 Cherokees died in this forced march, and it's known as the Trail of Tears. Now, historically, a lot of historians say that it's called the Trail of Tears because if you walk the path that they were forced to walk, there are hundreds and hundreds and ultimately even thousands of unmarked graves from all of the people that passed while they were making this walk to where they were being relocated. And they did this in the dead of winter during snowstorms. They weren't allowed to take any of their belongings with them. So not only do you not get to take the things that are most important to you, but you don't get to take even necessities. And everybody was removed, not just men. We had the elderly, we had women, we had children, we had women who were with child. And it is a really dark part of history, but I hope that it helps you understand and give you a good example of why we need policy to protect our Native American families. I thought it was important to read to you a message that President Jackson gave to the people of Congress on December 6, 1830. What he stated, he was giving an update, excuse me, on the progress of the removal. And he states, "It gives me pleasure to announce to Congress that the benevolent policy of the government steadily pursued for nearly 30 years in relation to the removal of the Indians beyond the white settlements is approaching to a happy consummation. Jackson declared that removal would incalculably strengthen the southwestern frontier, clearing Alabama and Mississippi of their Indian populations. He said would enable those states to advance rapidly in population, wealth, and power." So again, a little bit more detail on what the Trail of Tears is. So from May 1838 from March 1839, federal soldiers forcibly removed 16,000 Cherokees from Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, and North Carolina. They stripped them from their homes, of their belongings, and they were forced to march by foot to what the government called Indian Territory, which we now know to be Oklahoma. Again, at least 4,000 died, which was 1/4 of their entire population. Again, many were buried in unmarked graves. This slide will be posted for you all, and I've included 2 short videos that go into a little bit more detail of the Trail of Tears. The Cherokee Nation on their website has some beautiful documentaries and historical videos as well that give first-hand accounts basically from Cherokee about their ancestors and what they go through and the oral history that have been passed down about it. So if any of you have the time to take a look at that, I highly recommend it. So next I want to move on to the Navajo Long Walk, which happened here in New Mexico in 1863. So we again are in this time of history when we're dealing with westward expansion with the United States government going from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast. So taking the land from the entire nation. So we're here now in the Southwest. And by the early 1860s, Americans of European descent began settling around the Navajo lands, leading to conflict between the Navajo people and the settlers, and of course the US Army. So in response, the Army created a plan to remove the Navajos from their homeland. So just like the Trail of Tears and the Cherokee people, and this happened to multiple other tribes, I'm only giving you 2 examples. What they did is, again, they used force. The American government went in and forcibly removed the people of the Navajo Nation from their homes, from their land, from their culture, from their Mother Earth. It lasted 2 months and it came known to be the Long Walk. So I know that I have 2 experts that are going to be following me here, and if they have any more detailed information to share with you, I hope that they will. I'm sharing this with you from a historical perspective, And there's much more detail that I'm not able to provide, but more than 8,500 men, women, and children were forced to walk in the dead of winter to a desolate internment camp along the Pecos River. They were forced to go to Bosque Redondo Reservation. It was a military maintained outpost in Fort Sumner. So along the way, the information I have is approximately 200 Navajos died because of starvation, because of exposure to the elements, some even from the force, some from the fight. And when they got there, the water was not clean. The animals were not healthy. People were getting sick because they didn't have the proper food or resources or clean water provided to them. So not only were they taken from their home and from their land, their culture, away from their families, having their family die, but they were taken to a place that was dry, desolate. The soil wasn't good, and they didn't have, like I said, the proper resources to be able to survive appropriately. The Navajo Nation did enter into a treaty which allowed them to return to the Navajo Nation under certain peace conditions, but nevertheless, it is an absolute historical moment that needs to be observed and needs to be recognized, and to have an entire people removed forcibly from their home because they were Native Americans. I hope that you see what the problem in this policy was. The next problem policy is called Kill the Indian and Save the Man. And this really is a motto to describe the ideology of how mainstream Westerners thought about Native Americans. When I first started this, I told you that Native Americans were often seen as savages because they did not live the life that the Western culture did. They did not observe the type of religion they observed. They did not dress the way mainstream culture dressed. They didn't speak in the same language. They didn't hunt in the same manner. They didn't maybe gather or eat the same kind of food. They practiced different religious ceremonies that are sacred to them, but misunderstood by the Western culture. And because of that, they were seen as savages. And there was a need in the Western culture to assimilate the Native Americans, to civilize them. And they believed that they were doing this for the Native Americans' own good. Since they were savages, they needed to be educated and they needed to learn how to be proper. But again, the differences in culture, one is not better than the other. They both need to understand and respect each other's culture rather than forcing assimilation. And that's one of the things that ICWA and IFPA protect, is that assimilation. It is preserving the Native American culture. So kill the Indian and save the man. It's something that I really stress when I teach, because the slogan, the message, the motto in itself shows the savagery of the Western culture. So the assimilation of Native Americans into Western culture became a top government priority. So these words were used by Captain Richard Henry Pratt in his speech that was delivered in 1892 to the National Conference of Charities, and it was very, very well received. So his words were, and this is a direct quote, this is not any kind of exaggeration or any kind of catchy slogan. These were the words that he actually used, that the government approved, and then went on to form Indian boarding schools based off of. So his words were, again, kill the Indian in him and save the man. Pratt's ideas on assimilation led to the Indian boarding schools. And from my research, what he meant here is, although many Native Americans were actually being killed, he meant let's kill their culture. Let's end their culture. Let's annihilate their culture. Once we do that, we kill the savage. Remember, savage equaled Indian, equaled Native American. So if we kill the Indian in him, we kill the savage, and we're saving the man. The man will become proper. The man will be civilized, and he will be assimilated and then be able to go on and prosper in the new American ways. So in 1879, Richard Pratt went on with the government's approval to open the first boarding school for youth in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. So many of you will hear this as the Carlisle boarding school. And his goal was to use education to assimilate the Native American children to that mainstream American culture. So that year, 50 Cherokee, Kiowa, and Pawnee arrived at his school. And I have some pictures that I can probably post later, but what Pratt did and the method that they used to start the assimilation process was to first literally take everything away that was the child's culture, who the child was, strip them from it. So they cut their hair, they took their clothing, they took any kind of belongings that they brought with them. They would not allow the children to speak their native language. They would be punished if they were. It was highly discouraged. They were prohibited to participate in any of their customs, any of their tribal traditions, like dancing or religious ceremonies. And again, in the schools, the motto that everybody who was employed within the school to do this job of assimilation was to kill the Indian in these children. And if they did that, they were saving the man. So this first Carlisle school became a model for their Native American education in the United States. So they spread throughout the entire of the United States, and Native American children were forcibly taken from their families. There were some situations where they were voluntarily allowed to go to the schools, but under guises that they would come back and that this would be a better opportunity for them. But ultimately, in the name of civilization and assimilation, they took these children from their families. They stripped them from their heritage. They stripped them from their culture. And I think one of the saddest parts of this is that many of the children never returned. We'll go on to that next. So this is important, I believe, to give you a little bit more of a history on. So Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, she's recognized this troubled legacy of Native American boarding schools. I don't know if you've seen in the news a couple of years ago, but at a park on 12th and Manal, there was a type of memorial set up for all of the Native American remains that were child remains that were being found at some of these boarding school sites across the country and in Canada. So it came to her attention, and then COVID hit. So hopefully those things are going to be addressed further. But in June of 2021, Secretary Haaland recognized and stated that the boarding schools did in fact cause intergenerational impact, and she wanted to shed light on the traumas of the past in order for us to start healing and further creating policies that would bring restoration to the destruction of the Native American heritage and culture and families and children. So her findings detail the conditions experienced by the children who are attending the schools. So an example I highlighted here in bold of some of the conditions included manual labor, discouraging or preventing the children's native language, religions, and cultural beliefs. While children attended federal Indian boarding schools, they endured physical and emotional, sometimes sexual abuse, and in some cases died. So the investigation found that from 1819 to 1969, the federal Indian boarding school system had 408 federal schools across 37 states and territories, including Alaska and Hawaii. And so far, they think that there's probably more. The investigation found marked or unmarked burial sites at approximately 53 of the schools across the system. And that's just digging on the surface. Like I said, this investigation had just started and hopefully will continue. But I hope that you can all put yourself in the shoes of these parents who had their children forcibly taken to a school to completely strip them from who they were and were treated this way and sometimes never returned. And then the impact, you have to understand what it has on the tribe and the nation itself. Your children are your future. Your children carry on your legacy. Your children carry on the customs and the traditions. If you remove all of the children from that, there is nobody to teach and there's nobody to carry on the culture and keep it alive. So lastly, we have the Indian Adoption Project. And this was established in 1958. So to further the government's effort to assimilate the Native American children to mainstream Western culture, the Indian Adoption Project removed Native American children from their families and then purposely placed them with white mainstream families. And again, their purpose was assimilation, but what it did is it caused further destruction of the families and resulted in several generations of Native children losing their identities. So again, we had a question before we started of how do you connect a child who hasn't been introduced to the tribe with their tribe? This could be one of the reasons. Maybe their grandparent was taken and assimilated, so their grandparent never learned, and then had children, and that child never learned anything about their culture or was able to gain the ties with their tribe or nation. And now we have this child who is in Child Protective Services and under some of your care, and they don't know either. And that's really all of our obligation, the obligation of the state, the obligation of the children attorneys, of the judges, of the policymakers, and the resource families to ensure that we are, if those ties do not exist, we are going to create and restore and preserve those ties between the children and their tribes and their nations. So we have a government now who recognizes all of the trauma, who recognizes all of the problem policies. And what they've done since 1978 is try to create solutions. How do we fix these wrongs? How do we stop these problems? How do we make it better? We can't go back in time. We can't undo it, but hopefully we can recognize tribal sovereignty and preserve their sanctity, their cultures, and their religion and traditions. So first we have ICWA, the Indian Child Welfare Act. So the purpose of ICWA is to protect tribal sovereignty, to protect Native American children, and promote the stability and security of Indian tribes, and to establish a minimum federal standard for the removal of Native American children. I want to let you know there's still a staggering rate of disproportionality of Native American children in Child Protective Services. Okay, that has not gone away yet. And what ICWA does, it recognizes that, and it means that there are higher levels of protection for Native American children and families and tribes. That means there has to be extra steps. And what ICWA does is it sets a minimum bar. It means that the state has to be doing these minimum actions in order to have this child out of the home. So it also reflects unique values and unique cultures and unique traditions, and that includes having the tribe or nation involved at all steps of the proceedings. Just a moment, please. So just to go into a little bit more detail, the law, so ICWA, protects children in state welfare system and helps them remain connected to their families, their culture, and their communities. And if those connections with their tribe or nation does not exist, that means we help create it. So ICWA, again, also creates the minimum protection for Indian children in the welfare system. Judge Begay, the ICWA court judge here in Bernalillo County, when I practice ICWA and IFPA, I always use her example of what she said is ICWA and IFPA is a measuring tool for me to measure how well you are doing with this child. And what I'm measuring is really usually just the minimum. You have to meet these minimum standards. Do we need to go above and beyond? We should, but these laws create the minimum standard that have to be followed when it comes to a child of Native American descent in the system. It specifically addresses system abuses directed at American Indian children, and it promotes heightened cultural considerations as well as the preservation of tribes and nations. Tribal sovereignty is key and it's under attack, and we have to preserve it. So providing even further protection, we have the Indian Family Protection Act of 2022. So ICWA is under attack. Tribal sovereignty is under attack currently with the Supreme Court. And so what this did is it gave the state of New Mexico the power to preserve ICWA and to even provide further protection for the children and the tribe and the nations. So just in a nutshell, you must conduct affirmative efforts to determine a child's tribal affiliation. So that means you need to start asking from reason to know the very moment anyone, the state comes in contact with a child, whether they look Native American, whether there's any kind of signs, you have to ask every single child and every single family in every investigation. And you need to meaningfully collaborate with tribal courts to ensure appropriate jurisdiction. Meaningfully means not just a call, no one answered, and I end it. You have to work with families and tribes and nations to reunite the Indian child with their tribe. Again, even if they have no ties, the state has to work to reunite the child with them. Provide active notification to the relevant tribe and nation for any custody proceedings relating to the child. Provide tribal courts the option to assume jurisdiction before taking further action. Coordinate with the relevant tribe when conducting an investigation regarding an Indian child. And that one's key. What this means is that at the start, the inception of an investigation, a letter, a notice, a phone call needs to happen. All of those things need to happen to the tribe or the nation, notifying them that there's an investigation, and active efforts have to be made from the start, from the very start of the investigation. So you must follow language access requirements for proceedings, and then give tribes the right to intervene in proceedings subject to IFPA. But what this really is it is empowering the tribe, empowering the nation, and preserving tribal sovereignty. This is allowing the child's third parent, who is the tribe or the nation, to be involved in every single step and to make sure that they're guiding the way that this investigation and the way that this case action, if it had been filed, the way that it goes. They need to participate at every stage. They need to be informed at every stage, and they need to be able to have a seat at the table and a strong voice in everything that happens with this child and with this family. So thank you for being a part of the solution. I hope that learning some of the history will help you understand why these policies are necessary. It's going to take all of us working together to ensure that we proceed with these children and in this child welfare system in the true spirit of ICWA and IFPA, which is to preserve the child and the tribe and their customs, traditions, relationships, and most importantly, the tribal sovereignty, while we're keeping the children safe. So I thank you for being willing to be educated and for having the opportunity to be told that you can be involved in this process and should be involved in this process and helping the children be connected to their roots and who they are and their tribe and their nation. So I am going to take a look at a few questions now, if that's okay with you all.
Perfect, Janessa. We have time for one question.
Okay. So I'm going to choose, how can we help each child feel pride for their culture and the cultures of others? This is a really beautiful question, because that means that you're giving them a sense of belonging and understanding that they should take ownership and pride in who they are. But before we can do the prideful part, I think we have to educate them on who they are. And a lot of that can be done with books. There's different books from certain tribal authors. There's certain books on who they are. But my biggest suggestion is to make sure that your caseworker can help you get in contact with the tribe, or have the child's caseworker ask the tribe, what can you do to help bring some of the tradition into the home? And then you show that you're proud of that. Look how amazing. We're gonna learn about pottery tonight, and that if you see it outside, you don't pick it up. And then learn the story, or have maybe the tribal worker tell the story of why you don't do that. And that will stick. Those stories, oral history, will stay with the children forever. So doing little things to make their culture a part of your home, I think is really an active effort. And that can only be done by creating the relationship. So really leaning heavily on your resource caseworker, your placement worker, to get you in connection with those materials and with those tribal partners. But I think bringing the culture into the home and educating yourself, if you're able to, in order to educate the child, is the best way to go forward.
Perfect. Janessa, thank you so much for that and for your insight.
Thank you.
With that, thanks so much for rejoining us. I always feel like that's the fastest 3 minutes that we've had. With that, I'd like to go ahead and welcome Cynthia Aragon. She's going to give us a legislative update on ICWA and IFPA.
Thank you, Krista. Appreciate it. I just wanted to introduce myself, you all, to everyone, and welcome. It's a pleasure to be presenting to such wonderful people who open their doors for our children, who give our children a home, and to provide for them as a family. And I really appreciate the work you do. I'm Cindy Aragon with the Office of General Counsel, Assistant General Counsel with CYFD. I do have a presentation. Let me see if I can pull it up really quick and do this without creating a, do I need to share my screen first? Share screen. And then I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint. I'm going to do a slideshow. Do you guys see it?
I'm not seeing your screen. Go ahead and try it again.
Okay. I'm not seeing it on my open files. You might just go ahead and pull what I sent you, Krista.
Sure, give me just a moment. Okay.
So I'm going to start with the development of IFPA and ICWA, which are the Indian Child Welfare Act of 1978, which was enacted as a result of the Indian self-determination, that policy era during that time, to give tribes the opportunity to be able to become self-sufficient, to develop, and giving tribes recognition that they're able and can govern themselves and be able to act as sovereign nations. So during this time, this is a whole era when the Indian Child Welfare Act became policy. And I have quite a few slides. I understand I only have 15 minutes. So I apologize if I'm rushing through this, but my understanding is that this is going to be made available for you. And this is not an all inclusive, comprehensive. This is just touching on what I was able to pull that I thought was relevant for you. We do have a very comprehensive training that we've offered to legal staff within CYFD and to other important staff members that is a little condensed, but and I apologize. So if I'm going to touch on some points, I'm going to be maybe going through this fast, but my understanding is that it'll be made available to you. I'm from the Navajo Nation, Yate, Cindy, Aragon, Chiet, Chenjikin, and Shlen, Nakai, Bashas, Chin, Shiche, Tachitni, Shanela, Nakai, and that's the formal introduction in the Navajo way. So Indian Child Welfare Act became policy as a result of Congress declaring that policy that it was the best interest to protect the best interests of Indian children, to promote stability and security of Indian tribes, families, and that was the purpose of developing these federal minimum standards for the removal of Indian children from and placement of such children in foster or adoptive homes or within the child welfare system. And this reflects the unique values of Indian culture, providing for assistance. And so next slide, please. The creation of the Indian Family Protection Act is a state's effort to solidify and codify a federal ICWA from a state perspective, so that if the federal ICWA was abolished completely, how could we take the best parts of what we believe would be the best parts and work with tribes so that we can retain and maintain the policy and what the protections of federal law require. So it goes above and beyond. There's 42 sections of the House bill. It's codified in section 28, article 28 of the Children's Code. That whole section is the Indian Family Protection Act. It was tribally led by the tribes, nations, and pueblos within our state. And it's based on the lived experience of tribal workers, leadership, and practitioners. And this, we call it the law of testimony, because as we developed each and every provision in each section, there was a story that went behind it, or a reason as to why this section was critical and important. It drew from existing law, Indian Child Welfare Act, the Bureau of Indian Affairs Indian Welfare Act regulations of 2016, this Bureau, and the BIA guidelines. So, and it strengthens and surpasses the federal law. That's why we call it the Platinum Standard, which were the former Secretary V. Hill's words exactly. Next, please. It expands child custody proceedings. Federal law says that notice and child custody proceedings started when there was a formal proceeding that involved child care placement, foster care placement, termination of parental rights, pre-adoptive placement, or adoptive placement. This goes and beyond that includes child custody proceedings to include investigations. So, and any and all preliminary activities that happen before we actually file a petition. Next slide. So the other thing is it expanded the definition. What was an Indian child, or it eliminated some of that, requiring only that a child be a member or eligible for membership in an Indian tribe. So federal law says it had to be eligible rather than a member, or a member. It was to be eligible, they also had to be a child of a member. So that we took that piece out and left it specifically so that there was just the child eligibility for membership. And it's important here to note that we're talking about membership, not enrollment. Enrollment is an assimilation policy that came about from the federal government as they were trying to assimilate Indians during the assimilation era, and a blood quantum was based on enrollment. But the membership is a concept that was widely articulated and promoted throughout the development of the Indian Family Protection Act. Next slide. Tribal membership, who defines that? That means that it's made by the Indian tribe. The tribe can determine that, and that person that is a member or eligible for membership in that tribe. It basically makes it clear that the tribe has the sole right to determine that and make that. And it can be also determined by Indian tribes' law, custom, tradition, and practice. So that's important as an important expansion in looking at who and what, who has the authority to do that. Next. Best interest of the Indian child, the guidance to the court, basically that the courts look at best interest in determining They look at the testimony of the parties, prioritizing placement preferences, looking at unnecessary out-of-home placements, preventing that, and establishing, developing, and maintaining political, cultural, social, and spiritual relationships with tribal community, family, and clanship. So it's important to note that, and also protection, safety, and well-being, and then the importance of tribal sovereignty and the tribe's ability to maintain its existence and integrity, and the promotion of stability and security of Indian families and children. Next. So there's an area of good cause not to transfer. Many cases do get transferred to tribal court. We looked at findings for determining that. Advanced stage of the proceedings can't be, many times tribes didn't get notice of the proceeding until the advanced stage. If there's been information indicating that the tribe didn't get notice till the advanced stage, the court could consider that as they cannot base that as a reason for not transferring it to tribal court. The timing of the tribe's intervention, sometimes there was argument that the tribes intervened, they intervened too late, that this is we're proceeding with other options, that this is not going to happen because the tribe didn't intervene early enough. Whether there's been prior proceedings involving the child for no transfer motion was filed. If they've never filed a transfer motion, why are they filing it now? That can't be used against the tribes. Predictions of whether transfer could result in change of placement. Oh, well, if this child gets transferred, the case gets transferred to tribal court, the child's placement is going to affect placement. They can't use that as a mechanism for not transferring. Child's cultural connections. Oh, the child doesn't have any cultural connections. The family doesn't have any cultural connections to the tribe. They live in an urban city. They don't believe in tribal custom, traditional values or traditional practices. So there's no connection with the tribe. They cannot use that as a reason. Inadequacy of the tribe's proposed inadequacy of the tribe's judicial system, and any perceived socioeconomic conditions within the tribe or reservation. This family has dirt floors. They don't have electricity. They don't have running water. They're better off with the family that they're in. They have electricity. They have access to these things. Western European family that has these things. So those socioeconomic conditions can't be a reason for not transferring. Also, the delay in placing the child with the child's extended family or adult relatives. So any delay that was caused in placing the child with extended family or relatives, even if it took some time to get that placement, that can be used as a factor as well. Next. So there's also an expansion of active efforts. We have to, like Janessa said, identify extended family. At every court hearing, the court must find that CYFD made active efforts to comply with notice, and that we've made active efforts to comply with placement preferences. Next. And also that we've made active efforts start at the inception of the case, and it continues throughout the case to identify placement. We have to make efforts to search for and identify relatives. We have to place siblings in custody together and provide reasonable visitation if they're not together. Implement efforts to implement the cultural maintenance plan in conjunction with the tribe and the family. And we have to identify all our efforts that CYFD has made in working with the tribes when there's reason to know to verify whether the child is an Indian child. Next. Placement preferences also have to most closely approximate a family, taking into consideration the child sibling attachment, special needs, if any, and reasonable geographic proximity to the child's home, extended family members or siblings. Those are all things that we have to take into consideration, and it's codified here in these sections of the Children's Code. Next. Also, extended family member placement will be made in accordance to the following preferences. It's going to be extended family member, foster home license or approved or specified by the tribe. And then the third option, a foster home license or approved by licensing authority in New Mexico. So basically it eliminated the preference set forth in ICWA and the ICWA regs indicating an institution for children approved. And so also it comes with the order and of preference established by the tribe by any means. So if the tribe says we are going to go ahead and place this child with this person, or they have a preference, that takes precedent over any of these others, 1, 2, or 3. Next. Another change is the importance of noting that the child under 3 months cannot be placed outside those preferences, placement preferences of the tribe or those listed whatsoever. If any child is placed outside, this is in general, any kid is not in the, so the child under 3 months also reflects the fact that any child that's that young and the sacredness of that child as they come into this world in the early stages of their life. And that was very critical to the tribes when they were bringing forth the changes to this legislation. So all kiddos, any kiddo that's placed outside of placement preference, we have monitor those. We have an out of preferred placement staffing every 30 days. And then those cases have to be set before a hearing on a regular basis. Next. That hearing is every 6 months. And we had continued to have the burden by establishing why we haven't found the proper placement preference. And that this, again, this IFPA follows ICWA regs. Instead, that good cause does not include socioeconomic status of placement, ordinary bonding or attachment that occurred from time spent in a non-preferred placement made in violation of IFPA. So if there's been ordinary attachment, that time spent in a non-preferred placement cannot be used. Home environment that does not impact the child's safety and well-being cannot be considered, and the extent of the participation of the parents or child in tribal, cultural, social cannot also be considered in looking at placement preferences. Next. Intervention, the tribe has the right to intervene at any point in the process. The law also created and permits the child's relative or extended family, guardian, or Indian custodian to also file at any point in the process. And so the court will look at whether or not that intervention is from the family is in the best interest, and the court, in looking at best interest, will may permit intervention unless the party opposed can demonstrate there's a viable plan for reunification. The always ultimate plan for all our children is reunification. We sometimes tend to lose sight of that. And the public sometimes doesn't understand that the ultimate goal in child welfare is reunification with family. And if that doesn't work, then we look at other alternatives, but that ultimate goal is reunification. Next. So IFPA prohibits consideration of bonding between the child and the child's foster parent as a factor in terminating parental rights. So if this is a factor that they're going to use in terminating parental rights, then this is not that it cannot be used as a factor in Indian child welfare cases. Next. Permanency planning, again, the tribe's input is very important. Termination of parental rights can't be ordered. If the tribe proposes an alternate permanency plan to an adoption, unless the tribe. Sorry, Alexa's just took in over here. Alexa, stop. Sorry about that. So CYFD can show that they good cause supported by clear and convincing evidence why alternate permanency plans should not be ordered. Next. Definitions. The important big point is cultural compacts, which was a big change, a lot of change out of all the state. It was nationwide. This is one of the unique, innovative ways that New Mexico has looked at maintaining the child's cultural active participation with their family and relatives when their adoptive parents or guardians are not members of the child's tribe. And it's an agreement between the child, the adopted parents or guardian, and the child's tribe, and it documents how that they'll continue to actively participate in cultural learning and activities. Next. So this also is the importance of the adoption, guardianship, placement, maintenance of the cultural compacts. It's in order to fully implement the purpose of the Indian Family Protection Act. All children are going to be given an opportunity to maintain strong connections to their culture. And this will require the parties to the adoption to enter the cultural compact. And that's going to be at the discretion of the child's tribe. And the agreement is going to be how the Indian child will continue to actively participate in the child's cultural learning and activities, engagement with family, and each cultural compact will be specific to the child and show how the child understanding as a child grows and matures. It becomes part of the court record and it can be enforced by the court and included in the adoption decree. This is very unique. It's very innovative. It's not anything involving CYFD. We're not involved in the compact. We are involved in permanency planning, treatment planning, or any other planning that involves culture. We incorporate that, but we're not involved in the agreement. And there is no standard form for this. This is done primarily at the tribe's interests. Next. And all children, this is codified that all children, whether or not they're on or off the reservation, are entitled to the same services as any other children in the state. Next. And it requires mandatory training for judges. It also requires mandatory training to foster parents. And what's included in that training is conditions on foster care placement under federal, state, and tribal law, and how CYFD is to work with each tribe in New Mexico to develop that training. So we continue to refine, develop, and implement those processes. Next. So that kind of is a nutshell of some of the changes. We do have codified the Office of Tribal Affairs, which is by statute there to make sure that we're in compliance with the mandates of the federal law as well as the State Indian Family Protection Act. Thank you so much. And I apologize for my Alexa's taking over my talk there in the background. I hope that wasn't too disruptive.
Cindy, thank you so much. For those of you who know me, Mercury is in retrograde right now. So there are all sorts of tech issues with a number of just different things. So we definitely understand. Thank you so much. With that, I'd like to turn the time over to Shelly Begay with the Human Services Department. Shelly? And you're on mute.
Yes, I can tell you Mercury is, what did you make? Yeah, definitely, for sure. So I want to say good evening to everybody that's online. I do have a PowerPoint that I do want to share, and hopefully I can get it up and going. It's been a little bit of a challenge, but we will see here. That is not it. So let me stop and try to share again. Let's see here. Well, for some reason it is not allowing me to share. Okay.
Let me
go ahead and upload if you can, Krista.
Sure.
Yeah, I made just one slide change, and really what it is it was our land acknowledgement that the Human Services Department has created. And anytime that we give a presentation, we pay our respect to the original inhabitants of what we know as New Mexico. So we acknowledge our Pueblos, our Apache and our Navajo people. And so I'm glad to say that some of our sister agencies have also adopted the same. All right. So what I wanted to bring to you this evening is really some information, some really good information about the Medicaid program for the Human Services Department that is administered by the Human Services Department. And basically there are two types of Medicaid services and benefits that are available to many of our beneficiaries around the state. Right now, we have around 900,000 individuals that are currently on Medicaid. And for those of you that are on the call, it's very important to know the differences between the two types of Medicaids that we administer. So the slides might be a little out of, okay, I'm seeing out of focus here, but I'm okay. So the first one that we have is a Medicaid managed care organization. We have those three types of managed care organizations in New Mexico. For some of you all, you might be familiar with them. This presentation tonight is very abbreviated. We have a full presentation that we provide to our staff, not only within HSD, because we have 4 different agencies within CYFD, within HSD. And then we also provide an in-depth training to CYFD staff so they're knowledgeable about the differences between the two types of Medicaid benefits. The first one we'll talk about is a managed care organization. There are 3 managed care organizations in Centennial Care, and Centennial Care is a current Medicaid program that we have our contractors, otherwise known as Blue Cross Blue Shield, Presbyterian, and Western Skies. They administer a lot of the benefits and services to many of our Native Americans and then also all of our Medicaid beneficiaries around the state. Next slide. So as I mentioned, there are 2 types of Medicaid programs. You have your managed care services. We just did a quick review of the 3. And then you also have your fee-for-service. Just be aware that our fee-for-service population also includes individuals that may not qualify for the more in-depth coverage for individuals. And there are, I want to say, 45,000 Native Americans that are currently on a fee-for-service Medicaid program. Now, the difference between the two, again, you have your managed care organizations that do, I'm going to say, an array of services. I'll talk a little bit about that and some of the benefits that they offer. And then we have our fee-for-service. And I do want to mention that our Native Americans are the only individuals that have the choice to either enroll in a managed care organization or opt out and stay with the fee-for-service program for their health care. Now, there are some challenges with some of our fee-for-service population that choose to opt out of this type of benefit coverage and not go with an MCO. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Next slide. So for those individuals that want to opt into a managed care organization, I want to say that the managed care organization offer an array of benefits. Those benefits come in the form of what we call value-added services. There's Centennial Reward programs. There's care coordinators that help coordinate the care for a lot of our families and individuals that need, whether they have complex health conditions, whether they need behavioral health services. You don't get those type of services and assistance when you're fee-for-service, which is why it's somewhat complicated for a lot of our Native American individuals that sometimes experience complex health conditions or that need to get additional behavioral health services, physical health, or long-term care. We don't recommend either or. What we do at the Human Services Department through your tribal liaisons is to work with our managed care organizations, our providers, and make sure that we are able to give an informed education opportunity to our Native Americans around the state so that they're able to make the choice. Please remember that our Native Americans have the freedom of choice if they want to do a fee-for-service or if they want to choose an MCO. Next slide. So some of those benefits of choosing a managed care organization include value-added services. And so again, the difference between a managed care organization and a fee-for-service are benefits just like this. They both offer the same type of coverage. What's going to be different is value-added services and the provider network. Okay, so those are two key things that you want to take away. The value-added services is basically, these are non-Medicaid covered or reimbursable services that your managed care organizations offer to their members. These are benefits that are paid for by the managed care organizations. And I want to just give you a really quick visual here. For example, our highly most utilized value-added service for our Native American individuals that are enrolled in a managed care organization are the traditional healing stipends, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Currently, our Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services do not offer under what we call the Medicaid waiver programs that the states administer with federal dollars, offer an opportunity for individuals and for providers to get reimbursed for traditional or culturally relevant services. Unfortunately, we have opted, and a number of states had included these type of services in their Medicaid waiver program, and we're still waiting for approval for New Mexico. So we're hopeful, but that is not within our our right to do so. We do have to wait for our federal administrator, our Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, to give us the approval to do so. However, we do have an opportunity here in New Mexico, and many states look at New Mexico for the intervention or innovation as to how creative we can be to create such benefits and allow for the managed care organizations to also provide these stipends through their value-added services to our Native American individuals. But if you are enrolled with a managed care organization, my suggestion is to work through either their tribal liaisons. Every Native American individual that is enrolled with a managed care organization does have access to their Native American affairs teams. There are tribal liaisons within each MCOs, and I would highly encourage you to get connected if you have not done so. And I do have some information in which we can help you guide you through that process. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the traditional medicine benefit that's offered by the Native American affairs departments within the managed care organizations are stipends that are given directly to Native Americans that are enrolled in a managed care. Please keep in mind, if the individual is on a fee-for-service, these are the benefits that they're missing out on. Our managed care organizations created this type of stipend, again, to honor our rich culture in New Mexico and also ensure that they pay attention and they honor, again, that this type of holistic healing or traditional medicine that our Native Americans here in the state take advantage of. So as you can see, Blue Cross Blue Shield is one of our managed care organizations. They do offer, again, up to a $250 stipend. These benefits are available on a yearly calendar year basis. So every January they reset. And your Native American affairs departments within each managed care organization do a number of outreach sessions and do whatever they can to help promote not only our children in state custody, but individuals around the state that are Native American and ensure that they have access to this benefit. So you see the educational flyer that I copied here for Blue Cross Blue Shield. You also see the traditional medicine application with Presbyterian Healthcare here. I was just informed that Presbyterian does have an opportunity for their members to actually submit an online application. Please know that when any of our Native American members on Medicaid submit this application, the application is very non-intrusive. It's a one page. You don't have to identify how you're going to use the traditional medicine benefit. It's basically non-intrusive. It's a one-time a year stipend. Again, non-intrusive, and you use the benefit however you wish. Next slide. This graphic here is a copy of Western Skies Community Care. If you take a look, they have added their traditional healing stipend here with a number of other value-added services. And this is what I was referring to earlier. Your managed care organizations create these value-added services that are either enhanced from the standard Medicaid benefit or not reimbursable. And so as you can see, there are a number of value-added services that are available in addition to the traditional healing stipend. I also want to let you know that Western Skies and Blue Cross Blue Shield actually take their application and information through their customer service call centers. So there's no application. You just call them directly if you are a member and get that application started. Next slide. We're gearing towards the end. I just wanted to let you all know that there are Native American liaisons within every state agency. This is a value to you because not only is it recognized through our State Tribal Collaboration Act statute that we have, but every state agency has a tribal liaison to help our tribes, our Native American members, or any other constituents find out more information on how to work with our Native American tribes. One of the frequent calls that I do get, of course, is how do I get in touch with my tribe? I may not be enrolled, but what's the best way for me to do so? And I help out with giving them the best way to contact that tribe, how to, not specifically how to enroll, but basically resources that are needed to do so. So here within the Human Services Department, you have myself, you have Kalinda Vayo. I'm Navajo, of course, with the last name Begay. I didn't formally introduce myself, but I apologize for that. Kalinda Vayo, who is ACMA. She is from Acoma Pueblo and is our behavioral health tribal liaison. And then we also have Teresa Ballinger, who is from the Chippewa tribe of Michigan and who has lived in New Mexico and worked with the Human Services Department for over 15 years. I've identified some key things that we do within our positions. However, I want you all to know on the phone, and either you're on the phone or in our webinar, that it's just not limited to these. We do a lot of outreach and education. We have collaborated with CYFD on a number of educational opportunities in which we want to go out to the community, meet with our constituents, meet with our providers. And I look forward to, as the lead for what we're trying to do and bring education to you all as resource parents and families to hopefully work with you all more and answer a lot of the questions that you might have. But know that HSD is the largest, the Human Services Department is the largest state agency, and there is a need for 3 tribal liaisons, hopefully more, because we are very busy and we're here to help you and work directly with a number of our tribes. Next slide. I think we're at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shelly. We really appreciate it. We don't have any questions that I see in the chat, but if anyone would like to add something to the chat, anyone, Shelly or any of the team can answer within the Whova app. As a reminder, we appreciate if you take a few moments to complete our session feedback. And for those who would like to receive a certificate of completion for this session, please keep an eye out for an email with a link to request your certificate of completion. Again, please double check your email address. Remember that certificates of completion will be emailed out within 30 days of completing your online request. Recordings of week 1 and 2 are posted. We'll be posting week 3 soon. To access, click on agenda, go to the session recording. Finally, thank you all for joining us for the 2023 CYFD Virtual Resource Parent Conference. This is our last session of a 4-week series. So I want to thank everyone for joining in. I want to thank all of our presenters, in particular our presenters this evening. Very informative, much needed. Have a great evening, everyone.